My name is Celestine, and I was 32 years old the summer my parents sent a group chat message telling me that the annual family reunion, the one I had attended every single year of my life, was immediate family only this year, and that I should make other plans. No phone call. No conversation. A group chat message, sent at 11:17 on a Wednesday night, that I read the next morning with my coffee going cold beside my keyboard. The message said, and I'm quoting exactly, "This year we're keeping the reunion to the immediate family unit. We think it'll be better for everyone to have some time without the extended stress. We hope you understand." I read it 3 times. I put my phone face down on the counter. I got dressed and went to work. What I want you to understand is that by that point my grandmother, Nana, who had attended every reunion herself for 50 years, who had in many ways invented the reunion, who considered it the one non-negotiable event on the family calendar, was still alive. And she had opinions. Strong ones. She had, in fact, expressed those opinions recently, in writing in a letter she gave to her attorney the same week my parents sent that message. I did not know about the letter until 3 weeks later, in a room full of people, when an attorney read it aloud. The reunion happened every summer, the last weekend of July, at my grandparents' lake property in the hill country outside of Kerrville, Texas. It had been happening since before I was born. My grandmother had started it in 1971, the year she and my grandfather bought the property, and it had run every single summer since without interruption, through deaths and divorces and cross-country moves and the ordinary catastrophes that scatter families across decades. 51 years without a gap. That was the record when they broke it for me. I want you to understand what that property was because it matters. It is 11 acres of cedar and limestone on the Guadalupe River, with a main house that sleeps 12 and a bunkhouse that sleeps 8 more, and a long wooden dock that my grandfather built in 1974 and that my father and uncles have repaired and extended and argued about ever since. There is a fire ring near the water where every important conversation I can remember from my childhood took place. The kind of ring that has held enough fires over enough decades that the ground around it has a different quality, darker and more settled, like it knows it's been used for something that mattered. My grandmother's name is Nana to everyone who knows her, though her given name is Rosalind. She is 78 years old and has lived on that property for 51 years and intends, she has said more than once, to die there when the time comes, which she considers her business and not anyone else's. She is a former home economics teacher who spent 23 years in the Kerrville School District and who retains, in her retirement, the bearing of a woman who has managed 30 12-year-olds at once and found it not particularly difficult. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. She and my grandfather Raymond raised 3 children on that property, my father Gerald, my uncle Dale, and my aunt Patricia. Raymond passed 8 years ago from heart failure, quietly, in his favorite chair, with the river audible through the window, which is the way he would have chosen if anyone had thought to ask him. After his death, Nana managed the property alone and did so without complaint or visible difficulty, though I know from our conversations that she felt his absence in the particular way that a person feels the absence of someone they have built a life with, not as grief exactly, not after the first year, but as a persistent awareness of a space that used to be occupied. My relationship with Nana was the kind that doesn't require much explaining if you've had one like it and requires a great deal of explaining if you haven't. She was the person I called when things went sideways. She was the person who asked the specific questions, not, "How are you?" but, "How is the project going, the one you mentioned last month?" and who remembered the answers. She sent me books she thought I would like with post-it notes inside marking the pages she wanted to discuss. She called on my birthday at 7 in the morning because she knew I was usually up by 6 and she wanted to be first. She also, I came to understand, watched my family with the same clear attention she brought to everything and had her own views about what she observed, which she kept largely to herself until she decided not to. My name is Celestine Marsh, and I work as a cartographer for a geographic information systems company in Austin, Texas, which means, in practical terms, that I spend my days building and analyzing spatial data, constructing the digital frameworks that tell other systems where things are and how they relate to each other. It is precise work, methodical work, the kind that rewards patience and penalizes carelessness, and I've been doing it for 7 years and am, by all available measures, good at it. My company is not large, but it has clients in infrastructure, environmental planning, and municipal government, and the work is the kind that matters in ways that don't always announce themselves. The maps that tell an emergency response team which roads are passable, the models that show a city planner where the floodplain actually starts. I take it seriously. Most people outside my industry don't fully understand what it involves, which used to bother me, and now mostly doesn't. I tell you this because my professional life is a version of who I am everywhere. I build accurate pictures of complicated terrain. I notice where the edges are. I am good at understanding the relationship between things that look separate but aren't. I grew up in San Antonio, the older of two children. My brother Marcus is 28, 4 years younger, and is what you might call the family's easy story. He is warm, uncomplicated, well-liked, the kind of person who gets along with everyone at a party and genuinely means it. My parents, Gerald and Lorraine, are retired school teachers who moved to a suburb north of San Antonio after my father's retirement 3 years ago and who have, in their retirement, reorganized their social world around their church, their neighborhood, and Marcus and his wife Tanya, who live 40 minutes away and have a 2-year-old daughter my parents are devoted to. I live in Austin, 2.5 hours from San Antonio and 3 hours from the lake property. I visit when I can. I visited more than Marcus did for most of my adult life, partly because I am the older one and partly because I have always felt the pull of that property more strongly than he has. The river, the fire ring, the long porch where Nana drinks her coffee in the morning and does not particularly want to talk before the second cup. The family dynamics around me and my parents are not simple, and I want to be honest about that rather than flattening them into something easier to narrate. My parents and I are not close in the way that some parents and adult children are close. We are not estranged, we speak, we appear at the same events, we exchange information about our lives. But there is a distance between us that has been there since my early 20s, when I made a series of decisions about my life that my parents did not endorse. The decision to leave San Antonio for Austin, the decision to pursue a technical career over the education degree my mother had assumed I would get, the decision not to marry the man they liked who I did not love, the decision to exist at the intersection of several identities that my parents' church community did not fully accommodate. None of these are dramatic stories. They are the ordinary accumulation of a person becoming who they are while their parents had a different picture in mind, and the resulting adjustment that some families make gracefully and some families make badly, and most families make partially, over years, with varying degrees of success. My parents and I had been in the partial adjustment phase for about a decade. It was not comfortable, but it was functional, and the reunion was one of the places where we managed to be in the same space and focus on the things we shared rather than the things we didn't. Which is, I think, exactly why removing me from it was the move my mother eventually decided to make. My mother, Lorraine, is a careful woman. She does not act impulsively, and she does not reveal her full position until she is determined that the ground is solid beneath it. She had been, I would learn later, discussing the reunion with my father for several months before the group chat message, building a case, framing it in terms of simplicity and stress reduction, arriving at a language that sounded reasonable from the outside. Immediate family unit is her phrasing. I recognize it. It has the texture of something that has been workshopped. What my mother did not fully account for was Nana. My grandmother had attended every reunion since 1971. She was not consulted about this decision. She found out the same way I did, from the group chat message which my father had included her in, apparently without considering what she would do with the information. What she did with the information was call her attorney. I did not know this. I am telling you now because the sequence matters. My parents sent the message on a Wednesday night. By Friday, Nana had an appointment with Howard Fenn, the estate attorney who had handled her and Raymond's affairs for 22 years. By the following Thursday, she had written a letter, signed it in Howard's presence, had it notarized, and left it in his file with instructions about when to read it. All of that happened before I had finished deciding how to respond to the group chat. I responded, in the end, by not responding at all. Not to the group chat. I called my father separately, once, and asked him directly whether this had been his idea or my mother's. He said it had been a joint decision. I said I understood. I said I hoped they had a good time. I hung up and I sat in my Austin apartment with a specific kind of stillness, The kind that settles in when you have received information about how someone sees you and you are deciding what to do with it. The decision in this case was to call my coworker Lena. Lena Okonkwo has worked at the same GIS firm as me for 4 years. She is from Lagos originally, naturalized, sharp and funny, and genuinely unimpressed by nonsense in a way I find deeply restoring. She is also, crucially, someone who understands the particular experience of being the person in a family who doesn't quite fit the picture the family had in mind, and who has found ways to build a life that is full and real anyway. When I called her and explained the situation, she said, "Book a cabin. I'll fly in." I said she didn't have to do that. She said, "I know I don't have to. Book the cabin." I booked a cabin on Canyon Lake, about 40 minutes from the Kerrville property. Lena flew in from Portland, where she'd been visiting her sister. We spent the last weekend of July swimming in the lake and making elaborate meals from the farmer's market and watching thunderstorms come in from the west in the evenings and talking about our lives with the particular honesty that comes from being away from your ordinary context. It was a good weekend. It was genuinely one of the better weekends I'd had in years, and I want to be clear about that, not because it erases what happened, but because the story is not only about what was taken. It is also about what I found in its place. I did not go to the lake property. I did not call to check in. I sent Nana a text on Saturday morning that said, "Thinking of you this weekend." She replied an hour later, "I know. I'm thinking of you too. We'll talk soon." 3 weeks later, Howard Fenn's office called to schedule the estate reading. The call came from Howard's paralegal, a woman named Sandra, who had a voice that managed to be warm and completely neutral at the same time, which I thought was a specific professional skill worth noting. She said that Rosalind Marsh, Nana, had asked that the estate reading be scheduled promptly and that the following people be present: Gerald Marsh, Lorraine Marsh, Dale Marsh, Patricia Marsh-Huertas, Marcus Marsh, and Celestine Marsh. My name was specifically on that list. Sandra said so directly. She said, "Your grandmother was specific about wanting you there." I said I would be there. I should explain what I knew and didn't know at that point. I knew that Nana was in good health. She had her quarterly checkup in June, and her doctor had described her as, in his words, unreasonably healthy for her age, which she had reported to me with satisfaction. The estate reading was not triggered by illness or emergency. It was, Sandra explained, a regular review of the estate documents that Nana had scheduled with Howard, the kind of thing a careful person does every few years to ensure everything is current and correctly recorded. My grandmother was a careful person. This was consistent. What I did not know was the letter. What I also did not know, and would learn only in the days between the call and the reading, from a conversation with my Uncle Dale, was the fuller picture of what had been happening at the Kerrville property in the preceding year. Dale is my father's younger brother, 5 years his junior, the middle child of the 3. He is a civil engineer who lives in Houston, divorced, with 2 grown kids of his own, and he and I have always had an easy relationship built partly on the fact that we are both the kind of people who prefer to understand a situation accurately rather than comfortably. He called me 3 days before the estate reading in the evening, and I could tell from his voice that he had been sitting with Weather to make the call. He said, "I want to give you some context before Saturday." I said I was listening. He said that for the past 18 months, my mother had been working steadily to position herself and my father as the primary managers of Nana's affairs. Not through any formal legal mechanism. Nana had never agreed to a power of attorney beyond what was already in place and had, apparently, declined the suggestion more than once, but through informal accumulation. My mother had begun making the decisions about the property's maintenance, overriding the arrangements Nana had used for years. She had redirected correspondence about the property's tax and insurance accounts to her own address. She had, at Christmas dinner, introduced to the family the idea that the property would eventually need to be sold, that maintaining 11 acres of lake property was too much for a widow, that the sensible thing was to plan for a transition to something manageable, and that she and my father were prepared to handle the process. Nana had said, at that Christmas dinner, that she would think about it. Dale told me this in the even tone of a person who has decided that the truth is more useful than the comfortable version. He said, "I don't think your mother is wrong that the property is a lot to manage. I think she is wrong about who gets to make that decision, and I think she is wrong about her own motives in ways she hasn't examined closely. I asked him if he'd said any of this to Nana. He said, I said some of it. Your grandmother said she was aware of the situation and was handling it. I sat with that for a moment. When did she say that? 2 months ago, he said. The week before she called Howard, I think. I thanked him. I drove to Kerrville on Friday evening and checked into a motel on the edge of town. I did not go to the lake property. I ate dinner at a diner on the main road and read a book and went to sleep early, and in the morning I put on a dress I had brought specifically for the occasion and drove to Howard Fenn's office on Water Street. I want to tell you about the specific quality of the days between the phone call and the estate reading because I think it's part of the story in a way that matters. I did not know what Nana had done. I had suspicions, the sequence of events, the specific mention of my name on the attendance list, Dale's call, but I did not know. And the not knowing created a particular internal landscape that I spent several days navigating. It was not dread. It was closer to the feeling before a storm when the pressure has changed and the air is different and you can't see the weather yet but you know something is coming and you have already, in some fundamental way, decided to stand in it rather than go inside. My parents were already in the waiting room when I arrived. My mother looked up when I came in, and something crossed her face. Not surprise. She had known I would be there, but something more internal, a recalibration, the expression of a person who had expected the room to be arranged one way and found it needed adjusting. My father said, Celestine. I said, Hi, Dad. We sat in the same room and did not speak further until Howard came out. Uncle Dale arrived, and Patricia, with her husband Rodrigo. Marcus arrived last, a little breathless, and sat next to me and said quietly, You okay? I said I was fine. He said, Good. Me too. Which told me that he also didn't fully know what was coming, but had enough information to be paying attention. Howard Fenn is 70 years old, bald, with the specific unhurriedness of someone who has been delivering consequential documents for 4 decades and has learned that pace is a form of respect. He thanked everyone for coming. He said that before he reviewed the estate documents, he had been asked by Rosalind to read a letter she had written, which she had deposited with his office for this purpose. He said this was not unusual. He had done similar things for other clients, and that Rosalind had been clear that she wanted the letter read first, before anything else, with all named parties present. My mother's hands, which had been resting on her purse in her lap, went very still. Howard opened the envelope. Howard Fenn did not read quickly. He had the measured pace of someone who understood that the words would land harder if given room to land, and I understood, watching him settle his reading glasses and smooth the pages with one deliberate hand, that he had read this letter before and knew what was in it. He was not performing neutrality. He simply had it, the way a person has it when they have spent enough years holding other people's important moments that they have developed something close to structural calm. He said, The letter is dated July 23rd. It is addressed to my family. I'm going to read it in full, as Rosalind instructed. July 23rd was the Thursday after the group chat message. 4 days after my parents sent it. My mother did the math at the same moment I did. I did not look at her. I watched Howard. He began to read. I am not going to recite the full letter to you, because some of it was private in a way I want to honor. But I will tell you the shape of it, because the shape is the story. Nana opened by saying that she was writing this letter in good health and full clarity, and that she wanted no one to read it as the product of age or confusion or outside influence. She said, I have lived on this property for 51 years, and I know my own mind. What follows is my own mind. She described the reunion. She described what it had meant to her over 50 years, the specific detail of it, the fire ring and the river, and the faces of the people who had stood in that circle together. She said the reunion had been the one event that reminded her, year after year, that the family she and Raymond had built was real and durable and worth the effort it required. She said that she had learned, on the night of July 20th, that one member of her family had been removed from this year's reunion without her knowledge or consent. She said the name. My name. The room went through something at that moment. It did not go loud, it went the opposite of loud, the particular silence of a group of people who have just heard something arrive in a space and are adjusting to its presence. My Uncle Dale looked at the table. Marcus, beside me, drew a very slow breath. My mother's chin came up in the way it does when she is preparing for something. Howard continued to read. Nana said that she had spent her life watching her family, as a grandmother does, with attention and with care, and that what she had seen over the past several years was worth naming. She said she had watched one member of this family build a life that required courage, the kind of courage that is not dramatic, not the kind that gets applauded, but the quiet kind, the daily kind, the kind that chooses accuracy over comfort and honesty over approval. She meant me. She did not say, I mean Celestine again, but the letter was addressed to the family, and everyone in the room understood who she was describing. She said she had also watched, with less satisfaction, certain efforts to manage both her affairs and her relationships without her consent. She said she would not be specific in this letter. She would speak to the relevant people separately, as she already had, but she wanted it on record, in a room, with an attorney and her family as witnesses, that she was not confused about what had been happening, and she was not willing to continue permitting it. The third paragraph, the one the thumbnail refers to, the one where the room went silent, said this, and I remember it closely enough to give you the shape of it. She said that she had reviewed her estate documents with Howard and made certain changes, and that those changes reflected her actual wishes and not the wishes of anyone who had attempted to influence them. She said that her property and her affairs would be managed according to her directions. She said that Celestine was named in those directions in a manner that reflected the relationship they actually had, and not the relationship that certain other people preferred to believe existed. She said, I am not estranged from my granddaughter. I am estranged from the idea that my granddaughter is a problem. Howard's voice was even all the way through. When he finished, he folded the letter along its original creases and set it on the table. The room was completely silent. My father was looking at his hands. My mother's jaw was set in a way that I recognized, not anger, not yet, but the compressed quality of someone holding something and that is looking for a seam to get out through. Dale had his arms crossed and was looking at the window. Patricia was still. Rodrigo, who had come because he was Patricia's husband and did not fully know the terrain, was looking at Howard with the focused attention of a person trying to understand what room he had walked into. Marcus turned his head very slightly toward me. I did not look back. I kept my eyes on the table. Howard said, I'll now review the estate documents. The estate documents. I want to be careful about how I describe these because the specific numbers are not the point, though I will give you the relevant ones so that the picture is accurate. The Kerrville property, 11 acres, the main house, the bunkhouse, the dock, had been appraised 18 months earlier at approximately $410,000. Nana had also, over the years, accumulated a modest investment portfolio and a savings account, the details of which were hers and which she had structured, with Howard's guidance, in a way that reflected her priorities. The original estate arrangement, from documents filed before my grandfather's death and not substantially revised since, divided the property and assets equally among the three children, Gerald, Dale, and Patricia. Standard. Straightforward. What everyone in the room had, I suspect, assumed was still in place. It was not still in place. Howard explained that Rosalind had updated her estate documents 14 months ago, well before the reunion, well before the group chat message, initiated on her own timeline and at her own direction. The revisions were as follows. The property would pass to a family trust, with management shared among Dale, Patricia, and here Howard looked up from the document briefly, not for effect but because he was confirming a name, Celestine. Not my father. Not my mother. My father's share of the estate management had been restructured. He retained a financial beneficiary interest. He would receive his share of any proceeds, but the management and decision-making authority over the property had been redistributed. The three trustees were Dale, Patricia, and me. Additionally, Nana had established a specific bequest, the back bedroom of the main house, the room with the view of the river, the room that had historically been considered the best room in the house, was designated, by name, as Celestine's whenever she visited the property for the duration of Nana's lifetime and after. This was written into the trust documents. It had legal standing. My mother's face, by this point, had gone through several things. I was not watching her directly, I was watching Howard, but in my peripheral vision, I tracked the sequence. The stillness, then the controlled adjustment, then the particular compression that happens when a person realizes that the architecture of a plan they have been building has no foundation. My father was very still. His hands were flat on his thighs, and he was looking at the middle of the table with an expression I recognized from my childhood. The expression he gets when he is processing information that requires him to revise something he believed to be settled. Dale said nothing. His expression was composed, and I am fairly sure, that he had known some version of this was coming. Patricia had her hand over her mouth in a gesture that was not theatrical, just the involuntary physical response of someone absorbing something unexpected. Marcus, beside me, put his forearm briefly on the table next to mine. Not touching. Just present. It was the most he could do in that room, and he knew it. Howard finished the review. He asked if there were questions. There were questions from Dale about administrative process, practical ones, the kind a civil engineer asks about timelines and filings, and what the trust management responsibilities entailed. Patricia asked one question about a specific bequest to her daughter. My father said nothing. My mother said nothing. I said, "Is there anything I need to sign today?" Howard said there would be documents to review with him separately at a future appointment. I said, "I'll call Sandra to schedule." He nodded. That was all. The meeting ended the way formal legal proceedings end, with papers gathered, with chairs pushed back, with people moving toward the exits with the particular deliberateness of people who are managing what they carry. My mother walked out without looking at me. My father paused in the doorway and turned back and looked at me for a moment, just a moment, and I looked back at him, and something passed between us that was not reconciliation and was not nothing. He nodded once. He left. I thanked Howard. I picked up my bag. I walked out into the August heat of Kerrville and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the sun land on my face. Then I drove to the lake property, where Nana was waiting on the porch. She had made lemonade. She was in her good chair, the one with the wide wooden arms that my grandfather had built, and she had 2 glasses on the porch rail, and as she looked up when my car turned in, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has done what she intended to do and is at peace with it. I sat in the other chair. She handed me a glass. We looked at the river for a while. The water was low in August, the way it always is, green and slow and catching the afternoon light in long flat plains. The room was quiet, I said. I expected it would be, she said. The 3rd paragraph, I said. She made a small sound that might have been satisfaction. Howard suggested I soften it. I told him I'd think about it. She sipped her lemonade. I thought about it. I did not ask her if she had any regrets. I could see she didn't. What I asked instead was, "When did you decide?" She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, just finding the right entry point. "The Christmas before last," she said. "When your mother started talking about selling the property." She turned the glass slowly in her hands. "I have been listening to people make decisions about my life for the last 3 years. I decided I was finished listening. The documents were already changed when they sent the group chat message," I said. 14 months before, she said. The message was the last piece. When I saw your name left off that list, I called Howard and I said, "It's time for the letter." I thought about the timeline, the quiet accumulation of decisions made without announcement, the patience of someone who was waiting not to be vindicated, but to be clear. It was the most Nana thing I had ever heard. "You could have told me," I said. "You would have acted differently," she said. "That's what people keep telling me," I said. She smiled. It was a small, genuine smile, the kind that arrives without announcing itself. "The people who love you know you well," she said. We sat on that porch until the sun went behind the cedar line, and the river went dark and the cicadas started, and Nana told me about the garden she wanted to put in along the south fence, and whether I thought the deer would get to it, and I told her what I knew about deer-resistant plantings from a project I'd done mapping vegetation corridors in the hill country. And we talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything, and it was one of the best conversations of my life. Over the weeks and months that followed, the structure of the family reorganized around the new facts the way families do, slowly, unevenly, with different people moving at different speeds. My father called me in September. It was the first call he had initiated in longer than I could easily calculate, and his voice had the quality of something that had been thought about carefully over a long time. He said he wanted me to know that he had heard the letter and that he understood that certain things had been handled in ways that were not fair to me. He did not say that my mother had been wrong. He did not go that far. But he said, "I should have called you myself when this reunion thing came up. That was on me." I said I appreciated him saying that. I meant it. My mother did not call for several months. When she did, the conversation was brief and careful. She said she had been thinking, that she understood the situation had been difficult, that she hoped things could be better going forward. She did not apologize specifically for the group chat message. She did not address the estate. But she called, which she didn't have to, and she was civil, which she also didn't have to be, and I think for her, that was the version of accountability she was capable of at that moment. I chose to receive it for what it was. Dale and I talked more than we had in years. He took his trustee responsibilities seriously, which I had expected, and we established an easy working relationship around the property management that felt, honestly, like a collaboration between two people who approach problems the same way. He said to me once in the fall that he thought the property was better off this way, that the decision-making had needed to change for a long time, and that Nana had found the cleanest possible way to change it. I agreed. Patricia called me twice. The second call was the real one, the one where she said what she had been working up to saying, which was that she was glad I was in the family, and that she was sorry the reunion had happened the way it had, and that the back bedroom had always had the best view, and she was glad it was mine. I laughed at that last part. She laughed too. It was the first time Patricia and I had laughed together in some years, and it landed like something returning. The reunion the following summer was full, everyone there, Nana at the center of the fire ring the way she always was, the river low and the sky enormous, and the cedar smelling the way it always smells in the Texas July, dusty and sharp and particular. Marcus brought his daughter for the first time, Tanya's parents came, and there was a moment in the late afternoon when the whole group was at the water, and I was standing with Nana at the top of the dock, and she said, "Same as always." I said, "Better." She considered that. "Yes," she said, "better." My coworker Lena sent a bottle of good wine with a card that said, "Raise a glass at the fire ring." I did. The year after that, Lena flew in for the reunion itself. She became in the way of the best things, simply part of it. Here is what I want to leave you with. My grandmother is 78 years old, and she has been watching her family carefully for 50 years. She did not act in anger. She did not act impulsively. She made quiet decisions over months and years that built toward a moment of clarity that could not be argued with because it was already recorded, already filed, already signed and notarized and sitting in a lawyer's office waiting for the right room. She did not need to raise her voice because she had already done the work. The letter was the voice. The documents were the structure beneath it. And what she protected when it came down to it was not property, it was the record of who had actually shown up, who had driven to Kerrville in the August heat, who had sat on the porch and listened, who had called on the birthday and remembered the thing mentioned last month. The record is the thing. Build it in the ordinary moments. It doesn't need to be announced. The people who are watching, the ones who actually matter, are taking notes in their own quiet way, and when the time comes, they will know exactly what they saw. That's my story. A fire ring by a river, a letter written on a Thursday, and a room that went silent on the third paragraph. Have you ever been written out of something by people who forgot that someone else was keeping count? Or has someone in your life ever made a quiet move that told you, without a single word of explanation, exactly where you stood with them? Tell me about it in the comments. I want to know. Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.